Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, and today we are starting a new build. This is the Estes Antar, which, as you can see, is, you can see the packaging. This is a very old design that never really got released until the modern age, and it's kind of in celebration of somebody's anniversary or whatnot. Designed right here by G. Harry Stine. That's fascinating. This guy literally wrote the book on model rocketry. It's a really good book, and you should probably go find it. You can get it from the NIR people, but yeah, it's a good read. It hasn't really changed a whole lot, and apparently, in addition to being able to write the science part, he could also make decent designs. So this is what we're going to build. Now, this one is definitely not going to be a high flyer. It says down here we're only going to expect somewhere around 450 feet on a C engine, which is fine because this is actually the kind of kit that I like more than pretty much any other kind. It involves a decent amount of skilled construction. It looks fun, and it has some history to it. So we are going to go somewhat out of order based on the instructions. We're not going to build the motor mount first. I want to do the woodworking first. So I've done most of it, but just as a reminder, before you do anything else with your balsa sheets, you need to sand them. I've already sanded the back of this at least a bit, um, but we're going to finish up here. So the goal here while sanding is to not make it actually really, really smooth. Remember, we do a lot of work after we've attached the fins to get them as smooth as possible, but this is a good first step. And again, I've got a sanding block. I've got coarse-ish, kind of mid-grade actually, grit sandpaper here. And as you can see, I'm going in circles. Tends to be a little bit better at getting the sawdust out of the way. And it does make a decent amount of sawdust. That could probably stand another quick pass. I already sanded this once. Oops, this broke off. It was I was supposed to. That's not an essential element. But it is worth noting that you should probably hold on to the sheet a little bit better than I was doing there, so parts don't snap off. Actually, there we go. When I finished, or when I unloaded this from the bag, there were supposed to be four of these little pin, cutouts that had already snapped off. So it happens. No harm, no foul there. So next step, of course, we need to detach. That calls for our X-Acto knife. I've already removed the pieces from the other sheet. Remember, the critical thing here is we don't really need to trace each line, but we do need to make sure that we go through all the burrs, and we want to do it slowly and carefully. That was not particularly slow or careful, what I just did there. Fortunately, when the blade skipped out of the trench, it went into the part of the wood that we don't need. So again, no harm, no foul that time. Got a little lucky. But again, we're tracing each of the cutouts. And remember too, notice that this line here, I'm going to be pulling the knife toward me to cut along instead of going this direction because I don't want to get a little overzealous, cut past the piece and into another one. That would be bad. Most of these, fortunately, have been pretty thoroughly removed already. Now this one is still a little wobbly here, so I'm going to flip it over. You can see the burr is not quite cut through on the other side. That's easy enough to deal with. So those three pieces are clear. Nothing wrong with popping them out as soon as you are able so they don't accidentally get caught up in things later. The other thing, so this is probably not the most sophisticated kit that I've done on camera. However, it's up there. I think probably the Rocketarium kit that I built, the cluster model, is probably the most sophisticated that I've done on camera. But this one's up there. This one requires a different set of skills than the Rocketarium one. This one requires more skills with the balsa. And what I'm doing now, so I didn't really need to sand this particular part because this is not an element that's going into the rocket. Notice this is a little stuck, so I'm going to cut through it on the other side. This one requires, so if you recall from the picture, oops, well, that is again an unnecessary piece, but again, illustration that I should have been more gentle and just cut through on the other side as well. Anyway, if you recall from the illustration, it looks vaguely like a kind of an imagined space plane. So the fins are not all clustered at the back. And they're not even either. They are not, well, I mean, they're symmetrical, but they're not, we're used to making rockets that have 3 or 4 fins to them. This one actually has a variety of different fins that are going to go together, and some of the fins look vaguely like airplane wings. All right, so these pieces are part of a jig that we need to build in order to get those fins that looks like the wings lined up. We've also got this one that's going to get our angles right, but the rest are regular old fins, and they need to be sanded. Now, eventually we are going to airfoil them. Well, maybe not airfoil, but at least round them. But for the time being, remember, we need to get any remaining burrs off of them. So we don't need to sand, like this edge here doesn't need to be sanded because there's no burr on it. This one does have a burr, so we will sand it. It's somewhat unnecessary, as you'll see in the near future. But I'm not going to worry about getting the rounded shape into these right away. Recall also that when we have multiple copies of a particular piece of wood, we can line them all like this. That way they are essentially, they're hopefully going to be the same size. And it actually makes it, well, obviously makes it faster, but it generally makes it easier if you're holding more than one piece. You could be a little, maybe not rougher with it, but you don't have to worry about snapping it as much. So, going through the process, that looks pretty good. The back side here, you'll notice that the fins on this are rounded at the end, which nobody's going to put a burr in the rounded part. Fortunately for us, we're not going to mess with that. And you'll notice I just used a nice big piece of sandpaper here. This one got crinkled on occasion. I probably should dispose of this by now because the crinkle makes things a little bit harder to work with. But it is nice and big, and it's still got a lot of grit to it, so I don't really want to pitch it at this point. This should be just about it. Okay. Now, checking to see, that looks good. These are 2 other fins that I cut out of the other sheet of balsa. They've already been prepped the same way you've seen here, so they are good. It is worth noting, though, that there were 2 burrs right here and here. You can't sand down if it's kind of concave like this. So you could try to use the sanding block and get in there, but honestly, I think you're better just getting a little piece and sanding like so. You really only need to get the burr off. So it doesn't need to be, you're not trying to make this straight. It already is straight, ideally. So those are all my wood pieces taken care of. Fantastic. While we're kind of fiddling around with things and not doing anything, structurally essential to the kit itself, I'm going to build this jig. So the jig is going to work like this. You build it. They cut out these little notches so that you can easily air quotes, put it together. And it's going to look like this-ish. Of course, it's not going to hold up, so we do need to glue it together. So let's do that quickly. Easiest way is going to be to put the glue on the smaller piece like so. And remember, this isn't a structural element of the rocket. In fact, it's not part of the rocket at all. So we don't need this to be up to our usual craft standards here. We just want to glue the darn thing together. So that's taken care of, that side. Now obviously it's no good as is. The glue, fortunately, it being a little tacky in and of itself, will kind of hold this together so it doesn't just totally collapse while I'm attempting to glue the rest of it here. There we go. We'll need that in a bit. And okay, now this is not really any good to us unless it is at a bunch of 90-degree right angles. I've got the grid line on my cutting board here, so that's helping me. You could probably see just as well as I, if not better, when I'm trying to line it up so that I know everything's at a right angle. I'm going to just hold it like this until the glue sets, so maybe count to 30 or so, and then that should be good. I don't really need to do a whole lot other than that with this thing. I just want to make sure that it is more or less straight before I take it off to the side and let it set. As you could see, it kind of was more stuck to, fortunately, it was more stuck to me than it was to itself there. So it does need to cure a little bit more before I go move on to something else. That's kind of unfortunate. Anyway, we'll give this another second or two. The other different thing about this rocket that we haven't done previously, and that's pretty good, so I'll just move that off. All right, the other thing that we haven't done yet in a video is constructed a fin. Now, we've had plenty of fins, but we haven't had to build one from scratch, and that's something we need to do here. There's only, there's one air quote hard one, and then a couple that are on the easier side of things. So let's do the easier ones first. So there are these notches in these fins, right? And then there's these two have little protrusions that are sticking out. Well, they go together. So we're going to test fit these to make sure they fit nicely. And they should go like that. And you'll notice too that we don't want identical copies here. We want to have a left wing and a right wing. So these are both going to go on the top, as it were, and then they're going to stick to the body. Actually, I think when you actually build it, they go on the bottom. But that's somewhat immaterial for our view right here. They're the top. This is not particularly hard. In fact, it's really hard to screw up. All you need to do is get the glue, put the glue on the underside of the little triangular, I'm not sure what you want to call this. There you go. I am going to take the time to use a dowel to spread this out. Oops, something. Here we go. That's my epoxy end. So spread it out. But I don't need to do the 2 layers of glue because this isn't a structural element. So in it goes. Push it down flat. Because the notch is there, it's really hard to get this in at anything other than a right angle. But that is certainly what you're hoping for. And that looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit. There we go. So we will repeat. Try not to get any excess glue on the fin, because we want the fin to be nice when we finish. So any little excess little dabs of glue, try to get rid of now while they're easy to remove. Okay. Same deal with this one, but remember, we got a left wing and a right wing, so we are not making 2 identical copies. We are making mirror images. And I do have a little excess glue sneaking out the side, and that's fine because generally we like to have that little excess glue to start, at least to make a fillet. We'll probably fillet these, but for now we don't really care. By the way, you'll notice I'm doing this on wax paper. The reason, of course, is that I put glue in here, and it's, if I were just doing this on my cutting board, I would be gluing it to the cutting board. The cutting board is pretty resistant to glue, but I'd rather use wax paper. Um, and even the wax paper isn't 100%, right? I've glued things to the wax paper on many occasions, which is kind of annoying, but not a big problem. All right, so these fins are more or less done for now, so off they go. The last bit that we need to do is a full-blown fin construction. Now, there are 3 of these fins. One of them is going to get an extension to it, so it's going to be kind of like a keel or something like that. So we're going to have one very long fin that looks like this. The other 2, they are what they are. It doesn't matter which one we use, but and this thing is more or less dry, so we're going to get it out of the way completely at this point. So I got the space. This kind of construction isn't difficult, but it does require a little bit of care. And what's really helpful is to get yourself prepped before you try to do it. So I have a ruler here. It's a nice thick steel one. It's ancient in the extreme. And I'm going to use this to build the fin, to make sure everything's all snug and level. Now there are 2 potential problems here. One is getting it flush against the ruler so that it is level this way. But the other problem is a 3-dimensional problem. And if the fin kind of curls like this, that's bad too, because then the fin is no longer straight. So to deal with that, I have something heavy here. It is a thing of baby powder. More on that why I have this later. But once I have the glue in place, I'm just going to set this on top, maybe more like this actually, to try to keep the fin as flat as possible. So let's actually go about doing the construction. This is almost a structural element, so I'm going to glue this the right way. So I'm going to put a layer of glue on first, spread it thin, wait 30 seconds, and then add a second layer. And in the meantime, so the baby powder. The baby powder I have because if you want to launch during the winter or any time that it isn't particularly warm out, so early in the morning on a spring day or something like that, most of the parachutes that we have are made out of plastic, and the plastic can get kind of clingy if it's cold out. So if you want to avoid that, the best thing you can do is go grab some powder. Now, this is actually a pretty old thing, and there have been issues, legal issues that I really don't want to get into with potential toxins being in the baby powder. So go get yourself a fresh thing. Cornstarch would probably be fine too. That's pretty cheap. But in any event, you want some kind of powder, and the powder dissipates the static charge. So if you ever have any parachute cling issues, now you know how to fix that. All right, so second layer of glue, spreading it out nice and thin, nice and even. All right. Now, I am not going to try to attach these in the air. I'm just going to put them next to each other and then squeeze. And you'll notice I've got a big old seam of glue, which we don't want. I will show you in a later video how to get this joint nice and even so it doesn't look like a joint afterwards, because as it stands right now, I'm pushing about as hard as I can against the ruler to try to get these 2 pieces as flush against each other as possible. It's still going to be noticeable, and we can do a variety of things, not the least of which could be wood filler to try to take care of that problem. But the goal should be to minimize whatever gap there is at the outset. So I'm pushing pretty hard against the ruler, and so the 2 pieces are going against themselves. I've been talking for probably about 30 seconds at this point. That's probably enough that I want to move it. Now, I'm going to just kind of drag it, ideally. I'm not quite ready for that yet, it seems. The problem here is that if you just glue it on the wax paper, it is going to stick to the wax paper. So ideally, you want to kind of like do a first round glue and then get it most of the way set and then move it so that it's not sitting in another puddle of glue, because you saw how much I wiped off of there, hopefully. That was a lot, and there's probably a decent amount going through the bottom as well. So This has not set as much as I would have liked, but I still don't want to deal with being stuck to the wax paper, so I'm carefully moving it. And you can. There's a little bit of glue there. So anyway, since most of it is set now, I'm going to just kind of reload everything here. That looks pretty good. All right, now it's time for some weight. So I'm going to put my baby powder right on the joint, but I'm also going to put some other weight in the form of maybe a paint bottle down here on this end, and maybe my glue bottle over here. That way we keep the fin as flat as possible. So that being the case, I've got my workspace pretty well taken up here with a variety of different things that need to dry. Might as well put these fins back on as well, and put the jig down here too. That's about as much as I can do today. I need to let this dry. I could be working on the motor mount, but since most of my workspace is monopolized with this anyway, I think we'll give it a pass for now. So in part 2, we will do the motor mount, which is much more complicated than a typical motor mount, and we will see what other construction work we can get done then. So I will see you then.